How to write a basic history paragraph. James Couture, West Seattle High School. This slideshow will go over the key parts of a body paragraph, particularly the topic sentence, how to do concept development, how to do evidence and evidence analysis, how to do in-paragraph transition words to keep your reader on track, and how to have a conclusion sentence for your paragraph. So the topic sentence is the first sentence of the paragraph, obviously. It's a lot like a paper itself. In some ways, a paper and its body paragraphs are kind of like little Russian nesting dolls. You have introductory paragraph in a paper, body paragraphs, and then you have your conclusion paragraph. Same kind of thing happens in a paragraph. You have the topic sentence, you have the stuff of the body paragraph, and then you have the conclusion sentence to the paragraph. So they kind of have a similar structure each time. You tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them. So the topic sentence, which is the first sentence of your body paragraph, will quickly introduce the overall point or content of the paragraph. And that's it. No facts, no evidence, just what the paragraph's about. The topic sentence should have some transitional phrase, ideally, or concept explaining to the reader how the new paragraph connects to the other last paragraphs. So it can be like secondly, or in addition, or conversely, or similarly. You don't have to use one of those phrases. You could also just have something that's conceptually connected. It depends on how good a writer you are. Or you can just do first, second, third. But some kind of thing just so your reader knows like where this fits in the paper. A little transition word is really handy there. And then last but not least, don't make the topic sentence the first fact of your paragraph. Like give your reader a little warning. Here's what this paragraph's about. And then you go into the facts. But the first thing should just literally be laying out what's in the paragraph. So concept development. The writer needs to provide some analytical and detailed discussion of the point they are trying to make in the paragraph. So this can happen in the second sentence, in the second to last sentence, or kind of anywhere in the paragraph. But this is basically you doing the analyzing of the material part of the paragraph. These sentences often lead into or lead out of the evidence in the paragraph. And they also provide some bit of transition often between bits of evidence in the paragraph. So evidence. In a history paper, you need a lot of evidence. And any body paragraph in a history paper should have evidence. And this usually means a quote, usually from a primary or a secondary or a tertiary, if you're really getting fancy, source. And it can also include images, if you know how to insert those into the text, or graphs, or if you're doing an electronic paper, you could even have video clips. Any of that stuff makes sense depending on what kind of paragraph it is you're writing and what format you're turning the work in. And when you do evidence, make sure to introduce the evidence in some way. Don't just toss in a quote. Like, you have some sentences, then you have a quote, but no intro to the quote, and then you talk again. So you need to introduce in a sentence your quote. And so you can see there in blue, I gave you an example, and it says, Mr. Couture wrote, comma, quote, stuff. So something like that could work. And evidence can also be very specific information or a description, say, of a piece of art or a movie or even an event, just so long, and that could be true even if it's not directly quoted, but you need specific evidence, something where the reader knows what it is that you have to prove the point you're making. Evidence analysis is as important as the evidence itself. So you can't just toss evidence out and assume your reader is going to understand what it means. You have to explain it. So any evidence needs to have explanatory text to inform the reader what the evidence proves or what the reader should consider about the evidence. So this can be something that you put before the evidence, before like a quote. You could start talking and then you could say, for example, and then give the evidence later. Or you can have the evidence first and then explain after the evidence. Just depends on how you feel about like how you're writing that. There's no particular better way to do it. But basically you're making sure that the reader understands what the evidence proves. So you can't just toss in a quote. You have to explain why the quote serves as good evidence. You often will do, especially if you're in an AP class or if you're a really good historian, something that's often called sourcing. And sourcing means that the writer is explaining the context, the bias, what kind of media it's in, any of that stuff of the evidence so that the reader knows how to think about the evidence. So, for example, if you're giving a quote from somebody who's a very suspect character, or you're giving a quote that maybe only 3 people ever read, other than the people reading a paper, you might want to explain that so that the reader understands like where the evidence fits in the broader scheme of things, and therefore the reader knows how seriously to take the evidence or like what to think about the evidence in some way. So basically you want to make sure that your evidence is more than just tossed in. It has to be explained. That's evidence analysis. A small point, but a crucial one, is that you should have in-paragraph transition words and phrases. And any paragraph with more than one subpoint within the paragraph should include some transition words to lead the reader along. And transition words are useful so that the reader understands how the various pieces of evidence within the paragraph are related. You, the writer, will know, of course, because you found the evidence, you put it together. It'll make total sense in your head why the stuff is there. But you need to give some transition words to kind of lead your reader along. And simple words such as additionally, conversely, etc. can work. Phrases such as on the other hand are also good. Just anything that explains to the reader how you, in your thinking as the writer, are moving from point to point. So a little additionally or on the other hand often is really helpful for the reader. And you shouldn't assume that the reader is in your head. You need to explain how the ideas are related so that the reader won't have to spend as long, because the reader won't have spent as long thinking about them as you have. And you really want to just lead your reader along from point to point, kind of like you're taking them by the hand and making sure they don't get lost in your argument. And every paragraph should have a conclusion sentence, usually. Depends on your style, but generally speaking, especially in a history paper, you should have a conclusion sentence. And so that's at the end of the paragraph where you basically just tell the reader what the paragraph just proved, in case they didn't get it. And you should not assume that your reader will understand the point of the paragraph. Again, you've been in your head for a long time, but the reader has not. So you need to explain to them what it is you just proved. And if possible, and particularly if this is part of an essay, you need to make sure to explain in the conclusion sentence how the paragraph and the points you made in the paragraph back up your thesis or relate to your thesis. That's a crucial part in an essay. And you can put transitional words in a conclusion sentence, but I don't recommend it usually. It tends to fit better in the topic sentence of a paper or of a paragraph than in a conclusion sentence. It just feels out of place usually when you have the transitional words in the conclusion sentence. So you should definitely save that for the topic sentence. All right, and here's a model paragraph, and there's no new information here in case you are tired of this video. This is just me explaining an example paragraph and how it matches the stuff I've already just laid out. So the first sentence here, which is in blue, which matches the other slide about topic sentences, is the topic sentence. And it says, unlike previous movies from the genre, 28 Days Later reimagined both the behavior and the creation story behind zombies. So what this tells you, this topic sentence for this paragraph, is what it's about, 28 Days Later, so presumably there have been some other movies being talked about, and it tells you what I'm talking about with 28 Days Later, behavior, creation story of the zombies. And there's even like a little transitional phrase right there at the beginning, unlike previous movies. So presumably there have been some paragraphs about other movies, and I'm leading my reader along by saying, okay, we're on to a new movie. We're going to talk about these two things in this paragraph. There's no facts. It's just literally like, here's what the paragraph's about. So that's that blue sentence is. Second couple of sentences or a few sentences are in red there because that's concept development. So this isn't evidence. This is just me, the writer, explaining the concept I'm trying to prove in kind of a general analytical way. So I say some stuff about the zombies. Instead of being slow and immortal creatures, blah, 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 28 Days Later we're simple infected humans. It's not to say they're terribly realistic, but they're a little less unbelievable than other zombie movies. This made the film more frightening. So that's just philosophy. And a lot of students will write a paper that is nothing but that. There's no evidence. And that's, you know, at least you thought about it, but you really need to prove it. And so that's what the green text is. So I've done my explaining, my concept development, and now I'm going to say, all right, here's some evidence to prove that I'm right. And in the case of this particular evidence set, I put the evidence analysis first, just to be a little styly, and then I give the evidence after the evidence analysis. So I explain, like, even the way the zombies even the way people became zombies added to the tension by creating a sudden time clock effect. That's the analysis of the evidence, and then I give the evidence, which is from Ebert, who explained, and then I do comma, quote, and then I give the quote that Ebert is who's a professional film reviewer makes. And so I analyze the evidence, then I give the evidence to prove that the analysis that I had was correct. So that green section there is evidence from a reputable source making my thinking more believable. And then I shift back into some analysis, concept development. The speed of zombies is different from other flicks, so clearly I'm talking about the other movies there. Slow lumbering zombies in large numbers are terrifying, but those are borderline comical. So again, that's kind of like a whole paper concept development. Doesn't relate specifically to the evidence, but it does prove the point I'm making in this paragraph and in the paper in general. This is a continuation of that same paragraph. All right, so I've given you some evidence. I've made kind of my first point, and then I do some more concept development. The aggressive and fast zombies of 28 days later make the spread of zombieism both easier to understand and more frightening. And then I have that little finally there. You see it in purple here. And that finally is kind of crucial because I'm now going to shift to another point about the believability of them, not just like how they move, but this is the other subpoint of the paragraph. It's all about 28 days later, so it's a single concept paragraph, but I have two sub-concepts within that paragraph. And my reader might not catch that I'm moving to a new point within the paragraph, a new sub-point. So that little finally is very handy for the reader. It just leads them along. You can't assume, like I said, that they're in your head. You need those little keywords so the reader's like, oh, okay, we're moving on to the second part of the paragraph. So I say finally, and the reader's got a little pause there with that comma to be like, okay. And then I say the mortality of the zombies in 28 days later makes some scientific sense. Then some evidence to prove my analysis. In the scene where the hero is being chased through the tunnel, we see the zombies chasing quickly, and we also see them tiring out and giving up. That's evidence. It's not I could have given a picture of that, but I wasn't sure about copyright. But it's a pretty specific description of a scene in the movie, and it's detailed, and so therefore that can be evidence. It doesn't always have to be a quote. It just has to be specific to be evidence. It depends on what kind of paper you're writing and whether you're in college or ninth grade, but like specific evidence can be just specific evidence without being a quote. And then I analyze the evidence. The end of the film shows the infected starving to death, which makes a great deal more sense than the inexplicably immortal zombies discussed in this paper. So that's evidence analysis. All right, so I've done my concept development. I've given two pieces of evidence in this body paragraph. I've analyzed my evidence. I've done some little transition words. I had a good topic sentence. And now I wrap it all up in that kind of brownish colored conclusion sentence. By making the zombies faster and slightly more believable in a scientific sense, those were the 2 points I made in the paragraph, so I'm reminding my reader, this is what I said, then I wrap up that sentence. 28 days later goes a long way towards creating the perfect zombie movie. And so that tells the reader the point of the paragraph. There's probably also a thesis to this paper comparing zombie movies or something like that, and this one is backing up that 28 days later is the greatest of all possible zombie movies. All right, so that would wrap up a paragraph within probably a paper. That's the way I thought of this when I wrote this model paragraph. And basically it just has those ideas that you see when you write a good paragraph. Topic sentences, evidence analysis, concept development, some transition words, and a conclusion sentence to tell your reader what you wrote. And if you do all that, it can be kind of cookie cutter, it can feel a little boring, but on the other hand, it's always gonna work. Tell your reader what you're going to tell them, you tell them, you prove what you told them is correct, and then you tell them what you told them. That's really all you got to do. And if you can do that, you can write no-brainer paragraphs and you can worry about the ideas and not about the structure of writing.